Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemaphilepod.com. Georgia O'Keeffe is widely revered as the mother of American modernism and the greatest woman artist of the 20th century. In the 1920s, O'Keeffe became famous for her paintings of flowers, bones, and the beauty of nature. There's a lot here. I could go on and on about Georgia O'Keeffe, but I've got two of the experts who I want to talk to about this. And the film is it's a documentary film about Georgia O'Keeffe. It's called Georgia O'Keeffe, The Brightness of Light. We're joined today by the co-directors Paul Wagner and Ellen Casey Wagner. To both of you, welcome to Cinemophile.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mike.
And we'll get into all the title breakdowns in a bit, but I really want to thank you for doing this because as I mentioned to you before we got started, there was a Georgia O'Keeffe renaissance of sorts, a real kind of awakening to her work back when I was a long time ago, maybe 40 years ago at least. Yep. And it really kind of came into it. And that's the first time I'd ever seen her work. And it seemed that she had quite an impact on the generation I'm come from. I didn't really know much more than that sort of the moment that she was a big deal in the art world in that period of time. Where the genesis of this particular project came from, it's a jump ball. Whoever wants to take that question.
I'm happy to take it. Thanks. Paul and I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we knew, we've been here over 30 years. We knew that O'Keeffe had lived here briefly. There's the house where she lived is standing with a historic marker outside of it. But that's about all we knew until we went to an exhibit at the Fralin Art Museum at the University of Virginia. And this was in the fall of 2018. And it was just about her time in Charlottesville and taking summer classes at the university, which is when, at that time, women could take classes only in the summer. At that point, in summer of 1912, she had not painted in 4 years. She had really given up art. And the class changed her life, absolutely brought her back to art. And so it was kind of thrilling to see what the impact of that one summer school class was. And then by the next summer, she was a teaching assistant in the class and continued to do that till the summer of 1916. So we originally thought we would do a short film about that part of her life because we felt so unknown. But the more we looked into it, the more research we did, it became apparent that it was long overdue to do a longer film about her.
That is surprising that this is the first feature deep dive into her career and her life.
But there have been other films, but the last really good film was 1977. Georgia O'Keeffe was still alive and the filmmaker had her on camera and you couldn't beat that. So, we felt like it was time for a new one.
And I was very impressed with that work that we see from that summer school class that she took. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah,
I don't know how to describe the art exactly. I'm not an art expert by any sense of that word, but it just had a very defined sense of itself, and I really impressive. It was much less abstract. It was more formal to me. That
right.
To me.
Representative. Yeah. Well, what had happened was she had grown up in her youth up until her 20s, kind of in the classic European mode of really the late 19th century, which was realist painting, what they called illusionist painting. In other words, you painted to make it look like reality, three-dimensional with the light and everything looking perfect, the perfect still life. And she had just gotten burnt out on that. She was a young rock star. She was very successful in school at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Art Students League in New York. She was like the leading student. But she just got so burnt out on it that she stopped painting for 4 years. This is Georgia O'Keeffe in her 20s when she should be exploding onto the scene. She just walked away from art. And she took a class with the man she studied with, taught the theory of Arthur Wesley Dow, who was an artist, but kind of a theorist. And he was interested in Asian art, not European art, Asian art, where the whole focus was on what do you lay on this two-dimensional canvas. And didn't care as much about realism and perspective and those kinds of things. And this totally captured her imagination. And those early paintings that you're talking about, early watercolors, those were actually exercises that she did in that class. And they are kind of realistic. They're not abstract like you might think, but they led her to abstraction because for the first time, she wasn't worried about what she put on the canvas and how well it reproduced reality. She was just interested in what was on the canvas and was it beautiful or not. And
Yeah.
that freed her up so that within, well, with she was still here in Charlottesville on summers. In 1915, she started painting or doing charcoal abstractions that were totally untethered to reality. And that's sort of the first time we really see O'Keeffe as the O'Keeffe we've come to know.
But you can see the talent and that still life that we see that in the film that she was given an award for was really impressive. So the
Yeah,
talent was there.
exactly.
And you could see it. And the other thing about this film, by the way, the film again is called Georgia O'Keeffe, The Brightness of Light. And that is that her lifespan covers a tremendous part of American history, but particularly in regard to women's rights, the blossoming, if you will, of the women's movement in this country and beyond. And so this is really kind of provides this backdrop for the film that I thought just really elevates it in terms of telling her story. So, yeah,
Yeah,
congratulations. She really was of her time, but
yeah,
also in many ways beyond her time.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the women's movement, she's actually there for two women's movements.
Yes, that's
The
right.
suffragist movement, leading up in the 19 teens, leading up to 1920, her best friend was one of the leaders of the suffrage movement,
Yeah.
and she was very supportive. She was kind of a new woman in the early 20th century, but her life is so long, and her life spans most of the 20th century that she's also there for the early 1970s. In the 70s, maybe when you discovered her and I
Yeah,
discovered her,
yeah, exactly.
and a lot of women, especially feminists, discovered her as this amazing role model and a person who could be an example of what they could aspire to be and do in their lives.
I need you to help me through this next question and this kind
Sure.
of part of the
That's
because
what we're here
because
for.
because well because when I came to know of her it was as you said in the 70s. She was kind of labeled in a way, and it's addressed in the film, thankfully. The sort of the artwork that we were looking at looked very, if it was a man, it would be phallic. Let's put it that way.
Right.
The film gives the context and so much more and kind of puts not only her work, but in kind of the perception of the artwork of that time. Men could do this, but if women were alluding to a natural part of life of us being human beings, it was kind of pigeonholed. It pigeonholed her in some way. Is that a fair? Am I describing this fairly?
Yes,
Yeah, I think
yes.
that's right. I mean, I have to say, not to make the film sound sensationalist, but a lot of it is about sex.
Yes.
Because,
Well, she was.
is
She
that
was.
fair? You've
She
seen it
was.
now, Mike. Am I exaggerating?
No, because she was. Hey, listen. She's a human being. She enjoyed life. She was an artist. She explored life. There's all kinds of, and there's no reason we should be ashamed of the fact that she was a sexual being in any
Right.
way. But it's just that especially in the 70s, even then, there was this kind of sense that, well, she's a woman artist, so
Right.
therefore she's going to focus on things that of no whatever. You know what I'm trying to get to here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, to me, it's really fascinating, I think, to look at her life around the issue of sex. Because
Yeah.
of course everybody is that's like the one thing people know about George O'Keeffe. Oh, her imagery was sexual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what's more interesting is what was her opinion on that?
Yeah.
How did she feel about her images and sexuality? And other things like she was in a romantic relationship with one of the great photographers of the time, and all the photos that he took of her in beginning in 1918 are nudes. They weren't even in a relationship yet, and she was posing in full nudity for him.
Yeah.
And so those photos were exhibited in a big show in New York before anybody had ever heard of Georgia O'Keeffe, the painter. They just knew her as the beautiful nude model who worked, who posed for
Yeah.
Alfred Stieglitz, the photographer.
Stieglitz's
So
muse, if you will, right?
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you can imagine. So when her paintings come out a couple of years later, what's on their mind? The nude photographs.
Yeah.
So of course, everything that she does in painting is seen through that veil, if you will, of her sexuality as Stieglitz had presented her in the
Well,
photographs.
I would add to that. They would have tried to do that anyway, I
Of course.
think, given her work. That would have been part of the analysis of her work if she had never done the photographs we see with Stieglitz. And so, well, Ellen, in terms of just as I was describing the suffragette movement, the impact it had on her, how would you describe her in terms of she wasn't what I would call an activist, but she was a fellow traveler. She was in, well, how would you describe her? I'm not going to try to do it.
No, it's such an interesting thing because she was very supportive of the goals of
Yeah.
the certainly the suffragette movement and was so independent and such a fierce and strong personality. But she was not a joiner. She did
Yeah.
not feel comfortable signing on, obviously, certainly in the 70s, to the women's movement at that point. She was really criticized for that. And we hear it even now, sometimes people reacting to her and feeling that she didn't put her hand out and help lift up other women artists. But as Linda Grassos really beautifully puts it in the film, in her own way, she was being exactly the role model and showing the way to these artists that in the only way she knew how.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I don't think it was a rejection of them at all, but just the only way she knew how to live her life.
Well, one interesting thing that our interviewee Linda Grasso talks about, she says O'Keeffe did not want to be known as the greatest woman artist. She wanted to be known as the greatest artist.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting way of thinking about feminism and how she aligned herself or did not align herself with feminism as a movement. I don't know. To me, that's just a fascinating notion and a way of thinking about the way she looked at her art and her life as a woman.
Right. And I would describe that too. She's lived her life. And she is on the other side of the discussion of whether or not women's rights, she's demonstrated her affinity and her support for it. But that's where she is in her life. She wants to be known as the artist, no hyphen woman artist, just the
Exactly.
artist who's achieved all the things she
Yep.
did. Completely understandable. And it's also completely understandable where Judy Chicago is coming from in terms of where they were in sort of elevating women's rights in this country. And so, it's one of those things that, but she's true to herself. And the other thing that I was struck by is this kind of what inspires her in her life. And it's certainly nature. It's certainly being out in places that enrich her, kind of energize her throughout her life. That seemed to be really such an important inspiration for her. And let's talk about the work, the phases of her work, going back to from whatever point you want to pick up that conversation.
Well, in general, just to talk about the film and how her life was depicted in the film, one of the fun things for us as filmmakers was to visit almost every place she lived,
Yeah.
including here in Charlottesville at the university, but also in Texas. Everybody associates her with New Mexico for good reason. She loved it, and that's where she finally planted herself in northern New Mexico. But way before she ever went to New Mexico, she spent 4 years in the panhandle of Texas and was thrilled to be there, loved it as a young woman, and started painting that landscape. York Beach in Maine, a lot of people don't realize that she spent a lot of time at the shore. We were able to take our camera and move it through those environments. The obvious ones, in northern New Mexico, and Lake George, of course, in New York, where she spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
But just to have the camera there and give you a feeling
Yeah.
of what she saw physically and in nature, and then also look at the paintings that came out of those periods and those places. That was really fun for us as filmmakers. And I think for audiences, it kind of gives you a very tangible sense of where her art came from and what she did with it. There's a mountain that she painted, and here's the painting of that mountain. And
Right.
just to see the connection between the two is very enriching.
That's very important. Exactly. The film gives us those contexts throughout. I want to let people know where they can see this terrific film, Georgia O'Keeffe, The Brightness of Light. Where and when will people be able to watch this documentary?
Well, right now it has been screening in theaters all over the country, which has been thrilling for us because we love having people be able to see it with friends and on the big screen. But we're thrilled that starting in June, it will be available on streaming platforms.
People can go to georgiaokeeffefilm.com. No hyphens or anything.
Well, possibly.
georgiaokeeffefilm.com. They can find out all the information they would need to know in order to watch this film. And I like that she was her own person. Describe it to her where she grew up, how she grew up. Her family had some struggles trying to make do. Her father was went through a number of iterations as a businessman. It didn't quite work out. Ellen, how would you describe her family life?
Well, one of the really fun things that we filmed was her grandfather's farm. It's still standing. The farmhouse is
Well,
there.
that's right. Yeah.
And it was really wonderful to be able to see that. And what's tragic is that her parents ran a very large and very successful farm. They had hundreds of acres of productive farmland right there in Wisconsin. And they gave it up to move to Williamsburg, Virginia, because they were terrified that they would also get TB. Her father had two brothers and a father who died of TB, and they thought, we have to get out of this cold climate. We have to go to the sunny South, and off they went. And they just never were financially sound after that. He tried, as you mentioned, a number of different business ventures, and none of them were successful. And in probably 1909, I believe it was, her mother, I mean, I think both parents came to Charlottesville, but really he continued then to be rather itinerant and move around looking for work because a couple of businesses failed here in Charlottesville, but she ran the boarding house here in Charlottesville for UVA students. And that's how they provided for themselves.
Yeah, and tragically, O'Keeffe's mother then, of course, contracted
Yeah.
tuberculosis after
Yeah.
fleeing from,
Yeah.
Wisconsin to avoid it. She got tuberculosis
Yeah.
here.
That first 20 years of the 20th century were pretty rough.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They
Yeah,
really were. There were a lot of diseases that were ravaging this country, and
Yeah.
the flu, and yeah, and people forget how or don't know how rough farm life was, how
yeah,
Yeah.
mortality rate, working around these new machines that were becoming a part of the landscape for farmers. There was just a lot of that
yeah.
going on.
And also, Mike, I think something that I didn't realize until we got into the making the film about O'Keeffe is that kind of tough, crusty, independent spirit. You could attribute a lot of it to her being reared on a farm.
Yeah.
That Midwestern, late 19th, early 20th century notion, you had to take care of business. If you didn't take care of the land and making a living and working hard, nobody was going to take care of you for it. And so she grew up with that mentality, I think, that kind of Midwestern independent farmer attitude. And you can see the way it kind of carried throughout her life. She could
Absolutely.
be a little tough with people. She wasn't always the cheerful, friendly person you might like to have as a friend. She could be very tough-minded and severe and demanding. But I think a lot of that was rooted in her upbringing on a Midwestern farm.
Absolutely. And as I described to you before we got started, so much reminds me of my great grandmother. I mean, she even looks like my great grandmother. She had the same kind of bearing, same sort of no nonsense. We got work to do. We've got things we got to take care of. She was, and that in some ways, that's how I feel like Georgia was around her work.
Yeah,
I got a sense that she really committed in a kind of workmanlike way of getting her art done. Is that a
yeah,
Absolutely. She had an incredible work ethic. She was so disciplined and so focused on it
Yeah.
throughout.
And people always talk about and sometimes criticize her for, wanting to be alone and to, be in isolation, live in isolation, in northern New Mexico. But a lot of that was rooted in this attitude towards her work. She she describes herself, she says, I'm like a muddy puddle.
When
When people are around, I can't focus on my work. But when I'm by myself, the puddle comes clear and I can see what I need to do. And so that was sort of her attitude. She wanted to be able to have time and space to focus on her work because it meant so much to her. And she just had a sense of responsibility to her life as an artist.
Yeah, and also she worked until she literally could not work anymore.
Yeah,
Her sight began to fail her, but she worked and she even worked through that to some degree to make
exactly.
sure that she continued to do. And I attribute that to the work ethic we're describing, but also someone who really was talented and in that workmanlike way, she was going to work as hard as she could to see it come to fruition. And
Yeah.
that's for what I came away from this film was that determination and also a sensibility to be able to, as a woman, to follow her own muse, to not be dissuaded by outside forces to keep her from doing what she wanted to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. She was a fierce woman. And we, honestly, basically we're huge fans of George O'Keeffe. The film is made for fans of George O'Keeffe, but we don't whitewash her. She could be
Yeah.
tough and
Yeah.
tough on her friendships, actually, including her friendships with women. Even though we celebrate her obviously as an important feminist and a feminist icon, really, role model, she could be very tough and demanding, and we try to document that in the film. One of the things that we used is we had sort of two guideposts, if you will, in making the film, and they came from O'Keeffe herself. She was working on a book with one of our consultants and told the consultant said, what would you say to me to guide my work with you on the book? And O'Keeffe said, make it honest and make it beautiful. And we took those two notions and tried to use them to guide us in making the film. And as part of trying to be honest, we didn't whitewash her. You can see who she was, warts and all. I think most people still come away thrilled to feel like they've gotten close to an amazing woman, but hopefully they also see that there was a price to be paid in terms of her kind of fanatic commitment to her work. It had some downsides in terms of the way her relationships with other people played out.
Yeah. It didn't in any way dissuade me or diminish my affection for her work, for her determination to do the things she wanted to do. She stood up to men, powerful men in her life, absolutely, and they respected her, and she respected them. I think, if you're looking at the modern woman, this is a good prototype for it, for that. She is,
Yeah.
and also again, another thing we mentioned or I talked to you about as well earlier, and that is I knew of it from the 70s. I knew of Georgia O'Keeffe as kind of the soft around the edges, lots of flowers, lots of sort of pretty pictures or paintings. And they were, but I didn't understand the depth of them. I didn't quite get exactly how and why they were considered to be important work. For me, this film, Georgia O'Keeffe, The Brightness of Light, has given me that context. And I would urge anyone who's listening to this conversation, you think you know Georgia O'Keeffe from her work. Yeah, you probably have some sense of it. But I think this really helps kind of fill in the parts of the story that I didn't know, and I'm sure most people did not know.
My,
And
you just said the sentence that we have heard literally hundreds of times since we started showing the film, which is, I thought I knew Georgia O'Keeffe until I saw the film. I
yeah,
mean, it's incredible because she's amazing. She is, as we say, she's an American icon. Everybody sort of
yeah,
knows who Georgia O'Keeffe is, and
yeah,
everybody knows about the flowers, and everybody jokes about the sexuality of the flowers. But that's about it. And what you realize is when you get into her life, into a detailed look in her life, as we do in the film, it's so rich. First of all, it's so much more than flowers. There's
Oh, absolutely.
so many subjects that she chose for her painting
Absolutely.
that it goes on, and they're quite varied and different. And that's always a revelation for people.
I mean, a lot of people go through life and they know a name, they call it the Q rating. If you're in TV
Right.
or movies, you got
Mhm.
a high Q rating. Well, what does that mean? Well, I know the name, okay, but you didn't know really anything about specifically Georgia O'Keeffe. What you knew was what you saw passing through, your life, kind of flashing by. This gives us that context. It gives us an appreciation of her. God bless her. God bless her for how many women and artists and men who she inspired along the way to become who they were, especially as artists. And yeah, I thank you for that. Quick shout out to Hugh Dancy, who narrates the film, and Claire Dane, who does the voice of Georgia throughout the film. Congratulations on getting them involved. It provides this context. It provides us kind of the guide through the film in a lot of ways. And so good on you for bringing them into this project. And
Right. We
yeah,
were thrilled to get them.
yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And I just want to, in terms of the credit to our filmmakers who are our guests today, Paul Wagner is director, writer, producer, and I believe one of the co-editors as well. Congratulations on your work. And as well as Ellen Casey Wagner, who is one of the producers and certainly part of the creative process in making this film work as well as it does. Thank you both very, very much for your time today. Again, the film is called Georgia O'Keeffe, The Brightness of Light. And again, go to Georgia O'Keeffe, and I'm just going to spell O'Keeffe, Okeeffe. So people, because I made the mistake of spelling it wrong myself, so I assume a few other people did as
Great.
well. Did as well. So you can go there, film.com, and you can find out all about this wonderful work and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you, get to know you a little bit, and thank you very much for your
Oh,
time
thank you
today.
so much
Thank
for
you,
having
Mike. We
us.
appreciate it.
Really do.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.